Hey there everyone, welcome back to Bloodborne. Previously, we met with Gehrman at the Great Tree, again, but we refused his offer to free us from the Hunter's dream, which naturally led to us fighting him. So, after fighting Gehrman, the first Hunter, we were approached by the Moon Presence. As the story goes, Gehrman attempted communion with the Great Ones and drew the attention of the Moon Presence, which led to the formation of the Hunter's dream, where he was imprisoned thereafter. Since we defeated Gehrman, we were imprisoned in his place, and the cycle of the hunt continued, with us watching over the Hunter's dream. Now, there is a third ending, but we needed to learn about the Moon Presence to figure it out without looking it up online, essentially. So this time, we are going to reevaluate the situation and see what happens. Let's quickly talk to the doll.
Good hunter, you have come. Dawn will soon break. This night and this dream will end. Gehrman awaits you at the foot of the great tree. Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
Okay. I'm gonna cozy up debate here because I gotta talk about a few things. So, this is just another reminder that you need to re-download your original save file from backup to complete the final ending, third and final ending. So, the third ending is considered by some to be a hidden ending, and I would agree with that for one main reason. We need to know that Gehrman was imprisoned by the Moon Presence in order to figure out that there was an alternative ending. Or you could look through the trophy list, but in order to figure out how to do that, you basically needed to find out he was in prison. So you had to do the previous ending that we did, because that tells us kind of what happened to him, and we needed to know that name, Moon Presence. The other part of this is that you need to read some item descriptions and notes throughout the game, and there's a few particular ones that we're going to look at. Now, the main important ones are two notes that we found in the Nightmare Lecture building, on top of a few notes we find at different points in item descriptions. The first note from the Nightmare Lecture building stated, "The nameless Moon Presence beckoned by Lawrence and his associates, Pale Blood." That's the first one we need to know, because there's our connection between Gehrman and the Hunter's Dream to our original objective, which was Pale Blood. So we need to know the Moon Presence name to know to pay attention to that note. The second one states 3 third chords. Now clearly that refers to the third umbilical cord, but without knowing about the Moon Presence, we wouldn't know what to do with those. And typically, if you're like me, you're probably hoarding items in a game until you have an idea of what to do with them. You're not just going to use them blindly. At least most people probably wouldn't. And if you specifically read, let's see, which one was it? It's the Abandoned Workshop one. This one. So, this is the particular umbilical cord you need to read. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. That's the same dialogue for 3 of the 4 chords. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned to the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. So that's why we know, essentially, what happened to Gehrman. That's what gave us that bit of information. And this is the one that was found in the old abandoned workshop, which is why that's significant. So, the Moon Presence, that's what's really important here. We know that we have this thing that's going to imprison us if we refuse Gehrman's offer, or Gehrman's going to remain in that position forever, or until the next hunter comes along. So, communion with the Moon Presence is what conceived the hunter's dream, where Gehrman is currently imprisoned. There are 2 other notes that kind of refer to this somewhat. One is found in Yahargul Unseen Village that says, "Behold, a pale blood sky," again a reference to pale blood, and the other one is the one we originally wrote that we find in Iosefka's clinic, which says, "Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt," or by association of its original Japanese, "Seek pale blood to complete the hunt." One of our 2 main objectives that we originally got. Now, Willem and Lawrence kind of play into this a little bit. Willem supposedly had an umbilical cord. I don't know if that's ever stated directly in-game, but people have kind of surmise that he has an umbilical cord somehow. And Lawrence left the notes behind in the Nightmare Lecture Building. So Lawrence knew about this, figured this out at some point, but he figured it out too late because he became a cleric beast, essentially. If we follow through with the what we learned from the Hunter's Nightmare. So Gehrman contacted the Moon Presence using the third umbilical cord found near the doll in the old abandoned workshop. Or at least that's the thought. Lawrence left a note for 3 third cords, which would make a complete umbilical cord, essentially. So the 3 third cords, what we have to do is we had them in our presence before, and they didn't do anything for us. You have to consume 3 of the third umbilical cords to complete 1 whole. And that's what we're going to do. Which ones do we want to consume, I guess, is the question. That sounds really bad, doesn't it? We're going to consume umbilical cords. Alright, so let's do this one, of course. What other ones do we want to do? Let's do the stillbirth one. And I think this is the one we got from Imposter Iosefka. Let's go with the one we got from Ariana, the Corrupted Blood one. Okay, so we've consumed 3 cords. That should change things for us. We needed a whole cord is essentially what those notes were referring to, and we need them before we confront the Moon Presence. Because like I said, as we discovered, nothing happened when we approached the Moon Presence with the cords in our possession. It didn't make any difference. So, let's see what happens now. So as with before, we're going to have to deal with Gehrman first, and we'll see if that changes anything. Now, I don't really have any lore on this, but these look like crucifixion setups, and I'm not entirely sure what the spires in the background are. I don't know if there's any actual lore on that. The theme of the Hunter's Dream is quite interesting. Also, the garden theme here is kind of interesting as well.
Good hunter, you've done well. The night is near its end. Now, I will show you mercy. You will die, forget the dream, and awake under the morning sun. You will be freed from this terrible hunter's dream.
So same as previously, we are going to refuse.
Dear, oh dear. What was it? The hunt? The blood? Or the horrible dream? Oh, it doesn't matter. It always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sorts of messes. Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt.
Oh, it does hurt. Okay. I was backing up and then I really wasn't sure. Uh-oh. Can't heal. Oh. Oh my god. Oh, this is bad. Oh, this is bad. Yeah, watch out for that.
Are you cold? Oh, good hunter.
Good. All signed and sealed. Now, let's begin the transfusion. Oh, don't you worry. Whatever happens, you may think it all a mere bad dream.
You found yourself a hunter.
All right, so that was the third and final ending, referred to as childhood's beginning, and the description states, you became an infant great one, lifting humanity into its next childhood, which I will talk about more later. The doll's dialogue in this case is more or less, I think, an implication that you are the new great one, the squid thingy. The I don't know if that, I guess would that make us, that kind of would make us kin, I guess. She says, "Are you cold, oh good hunter?" Which is kind of the reference that the squid thingy is you. So I have a few things I want to comment on there. First, the umbilical cords, so I think are kind of an interesting point, and they kind of led to all of this. First of all, two of the third cords are found on women specifically, which included Ariana and imposter Iosefka, which I think is kind of important because we have this whole idea of Odin impregnating women, and maybe the other great ones are doing this as well. Kaz, for instance, could be doing this. One of them came from Murgo, so more specifically from the Great One itself, and then the fourth was found near the doll in the waking world. Now, this would collectively suggest, like I said, that Odin is possibly impregnating women during the Red Moon, or maybe some other great ones are playing a role in this as well, but Odin's definitely the one that's pointed to the most, because we always hear this, Odin's name comes up a lot with this, and we always hear about them wanting to have a surrogate child because they always lose their children. Is kind of how that's played off. Now, where the abandoned workshop cord comes from is something of a mystery, and I was kind of considering the idea that it may have come from Lady Maria somehow. Maybe she got it from Kaz directly because she was there at the fishing hamlet, and that's the only other great one I could possibly link that to. Hypothetically, I'm also thinking maybe there's a relationship between the cord and the doll, or possibly it's just the moon presence itself. The one that makes the most sense to me, though, is that it possibly came from Kaz, indirectly from Lady Maria. Now, we've learned a little bit about how that particular cord, the one from the abandoned workshop, had conceived the hunter's dream. So the description said that the third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. So Gehrman called on the Great Ones using the third umbilical cord, which kind of gave rise to the hunter's dream, where he was then imprisoned by the moon presence. So he apparently caught the moon presence attention, which was kind of the new thing that I wanted to really talk about. The moon presence itself, and by association, the messengers, because I think there's a close association between the moon presence, the messengers, and the doll, to an extent. Now, the moon presence, having the whole umbilical cord, by consuming the 3/3 umbilical cords, that somehow allowed us to overpower the moon presence and essentially slay the final nightmare of the ones we've been to so far. Because we did this with the Hunter's Nightmare when we slayed the Orphan of Kaz. We did this with the Nightmare of Mensis, where we slayed the Murgo's wet nurse and released Murgo. And now, by association, what we just did with the moon presence itself, kind of, releasing. I don't know about releasing the moon presence, but kind of taking over the Hunter's Dream in a way, it seemed. Now, I brought up the piece of dialogue the rare piece of dialogue that the doll mentions when we went over the first ending. So I'm going to recap that because this is where I wanted to break this down a little bit because it plays in a bit to the moon presence and the messengers and the Hunter's Dream as a whole. So the dialogue goes, again, as a recap, O Flora of the moon of the dream, O little ones, O fleeting will of the ancients. Let the hunter be safe, let her find comfort, and let this dream her captor foretell a pleasant awakening. Be one day a fond, distant memory. The first part of that I want to focus on is O Flora of the moon of the dream. Because it's thought by many that the nameless moon presence, as the moon presence is commonly referred to, also sometimes referred as the pale moon, is likely named Flora. And if you kind of go back to some of the older ideas, this kind of relates into Pale Blood a little bit as well. I have some additional thoughts on that I'm going to get into a little bit later, though. So it's thought by many that Flora is specifically the name of the moon presence, and the reason behind that is because in the original Japanese, Flora was capitalized like it was a noun, or so the original translation goes, or the translation itself. I don't remember because I've never actually seen the dialogue specifically. But Flora is referred to as a noun, like a person, so to speak, which is why many people believe that the moon presence name is actually Flora. Some people believe that Flora might be referring to the flowers, but again, the fact that it's capitalized is kind of a big thing, if that was done correctly. We know they've made mistakes and stuff before with dialogue. Now, Pale Blood was the original goal we were given. Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. It's thought, some have thought, and honestly I could see it going this way, that pale blood specifically refers to the moon presence as just kind of an alternative name for it, though I've also had some consideration this is my consideration, not others, so this is me actually giving my own thoughts. I do have original thoughts on occasion. That pale blood could actually refer to the kin great ones that we have been killing, since they bleed a yellow fluid rather than red blood, as with the true great ones like the moon presence, because you could see the moon presence was bleeding red. So I had a thought that maybe pale blood referred to kin great ones instead of the moon presence itself. Again, just some of my own thoughts. I have nothing to support that. That's just some thoughts I had of my own, and I will bring that up more later. Now, one thing I wanted to point out about the moon presence, and we are going to talk about the moon presence a bit more down the road. I have some thoughts on it. Is the move that the moon presence did, the one where it kind of drops your HP down to 1. It's referred to in the code, I believe, as Doom Gaze. And if you watch the way it does it, it's identical to how we use the Hunter's Mark and the Bold Hunter's Marks to go back to the lamps. I thought that was really interesting. Somebody pointed out, because you kind of throw your head back like you're slamming a beer or something. And it's kind of like you're holding your head like you're trying to focus on your mind's eye, so to speak. And so someone had pointed out that there's several people actually, I think, have pointed this out, because I've read this in several locations, that it's very reminiscent of how we use the Hunter's Marks. And so I thought that was a really interesting point on that. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention are the messengers. So the doll in her dialogue that I was referring to said, "O little ones, O fleeting will of the ancients." And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, because she does refer to them as little ones. The little ones are the messengers. That's what she's referring to, because we've heard her mention them as little ones before, or refer to them as little ones. So some people, if you go kind of read some of the forums out there, believe that the messengers, they've been helping us throughout the game. That part's clear. But some people believe that they are familiars of the moon presence, which I thought was kind of interesting. And some people have pointed out that there's a similar kind of crater shape appearance in the mouth of the messengers in the moon presence. I don't necessarily see that in all cases, but I can sort of see that to some extent. I've also heard people describe that the moon presence's mouth or whatever that is almost looks more like an ear, kind of going back on the idea that, Bloodborne has a lot of themes in it, sound being one of them, as kind of reference if you think of like blood echoes, for instance. So it kind of was, I thought it was kind of interesting because I looked at the moon presence more closely and I was like, yeah, it does kind of look like an ear if you use your imagination a little bit. Now the messengers, like I said, they kind of helped us throughout the game. They light lanterns to guide us. If you look at that intro video after we do the blood transfusion, something launches like it looks like a fire attack on them. I'm assuming that's the messengers because then they kind of rise up on us. I'm not entirely sure on that, but to me it kind of implied that they're, again, protecting us to an extent. Some people have pointed out, and I think this is another thing I read in the forums, that how did we go from Moonside Lake to Yahar'gul after we killed Rom? Because if you look at the character during the cutscene, it looks like our character passes out. And some people have suggested that the messengers may have moved us towards Yahar'gul as kind of directing us towards our next objective. And again, I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. But it's like they rescued us from, either rescued us or moved us as the Red Moon was coming. So I don't know if it's necessarily a rescue, maybe it was a rescue, but either way, they pushed us towards our objective of Slay the Nightmare Newborn. Again, I got more on that to go on as well. Now, kind of one last thing I wanted to bring up is, refers more to us and the hunters tied to the dream, which I thought was really interesting. This is some stuff that I more specifically read in forums, not in any definitive lore, but I just thought it was really interesting. That the hunters that are tethered to the dream are returned upon death until essentially they serve their purpose to the moon presence. That seems to be kind of a constant with us. Every time we die, as we're tethered to the dream, presumably until Gehrman kind of decapitated us in the first ending, we would always come back if we died. And there's a common theme in some characters in the game. I don't have a concrete memory of everybody. I know Annalise says it, but they refer to us as moon-scented. So there are several characters in the game I know that make this comment. I don't remember exactly which ones, but I know Annalise is one of them. So they call you a moon. They refer to kind of moon-scented smell, or refer to you as a moon-scented hunter or huntress when you're around them. And somebody even pointed out that look at what happens with some of the beasts in the story. Like Father Gascoigne, when you approach him, finally turns into a beast. Vicar Amelia, when you finally approach her, turns into a beast. And how so many characters in the game just attack us on sight, except for the kin great ones, essentially, or some of the more normal people like Eileen, for instance. So many of them just instantly attack us. Is it the moon-scented aspect that we're getting from the hunter's dream that provoked Gascoigne into becoming a beast, provoked Vicar Amelia to become a beast? Because man, that change happened quick with them. With Gascoigne's fight, it's immediate during the fight. He changes quite quickly, and Vicar Amelia when we approach her. So I thought that was a really interesting point. So it seems like those of us that are dream tethered carry some kind of essence of the moon presence that's giving us that smell, kind of a unique smell. And the only other time I can think of that smell is referred to with us is where Gascoigne's daughter refers to us as, smelling like a hunter. And I think there's one point where Ariana refers to us as having kind of an interesting smell. I don't remember if she says hunter smell or moon-scented smell, but she makes a comment over the smell. So, kind of concluding on the moon presence there, I mentioned this in the previous ending, is that the moon presence is a great one that seems to be aggressive towards other great ones, but the purpose of that seems unclear. And some people have the idea that maybe the moon presence is preying on other great ones as a way to sustain itself. And then kind of my extension of idea on this is, what if the moon presence's sole purpose is to just destroy the other nightmare realms? Or more specifically, maybe it just wanted to destroy the Nightmare of Mensis. Who knows? So I am going to come back on that. All right, so what I want to do here is kind of give a recap of the story of events that led up to us coming to Yharnam, kind of things that led to the way things were before we got here, and then just a very brief kind of overview of what we did as far as major significance points. So the story kind of begins in the past with the Temerians. The Temerians were known as superhuman beings that were thought to have unlocked the wisdom of the Eldritch Truth and communed with the Great Ones. The Great Ones have been described, and I've said this 100 times probably now, as extremely powerful and multidimensional cosmic beings that function on transcendental planes of thought. Say that 5 times fast. The idea is that the Temerians had communed with the Great Ones, and that they are also well known for having carved out the Temerian labyrinths, which were later found by Byrgenwerth and referred to as the Tomb of the Old Gods. And that's kind of their significance here, because we don't know much about the Temerians otherwise. So our storyline kind of begins more or less with Byrgenwerth. Byrgenwerth College, essentially much later in time, the Byrgenwerth scholars from Byrgenwerth College found the Temerian labyrinths, where they discovered remnants of what they refer to as the Left Behind Great Ones. Things like the pearl slugs and the phantasm shells, along with some form of holy medium that they used to commune with them. Now, Runesmith Carroll was the scholar known for transcribing what was referred to as inhuman utterings of the Great Ones into the Carroll runes that we've been using throughout the game to essentially give us more power. Then there's Master Willem, who became obsessed with the truth and seeking this eldritch knowledge, or as we've been referring to it more as insight, that allows us to see things that we otherwise could not see, or understand things better maybe in a perspective. He wanted to line his brain with eyes, quite literally, he took this very literally, to elevate his thoughts and look to beings of higher planes, i.e. the Great Ones, for that insight. And so the common theme in Byrgenwerth, if you go back there, was eyes and insight. And you can even see the insight of mine. It's at 99 in the top right corner, has an eye icon next to it. So the remnants of the scholars that we found around Byrgenwerth, other than Willem himself and a member of the choir that happened to be lurking around, have since become these arthropod-like beasts, many of them that have numerous eyes, where Willem himself remained in the Lunarium, but he was really the only one that was left. Now, Willem had an apprentice named Lawrence, which is kind of where the factions start to come into this. So Willem feared the old blood of the Left Behind Great Ones, where his apprentice Lawrence disagreed with him and thought that they should use the old blood. Lawrence eventually left Byrgenwerth and founded the Healing Church, which was renowned for using the old blood of Ebrietas, or at least I assume it's Ebrietas, for blood ministration, or as sometimes referred to as blood healing. This went on to the point where, if you read descriptions, blood has become more common in Yharnam than even alcohol as a beverage, and its effects are more intoxicating. Now, the Healing Church was essentially then broken up into factions. When those formed exactly, we don't entirely know, but let's start with the first main one, which is, what we learned about in Upper Cathedral Ward. The Healing Church was divided into 3 main factions, including the Choir, School of Mensis, and the Hunters, essentially. The Choir consisted of the highest-ranking clerics of the Healing Church that essentially continued the work started at Byrgenwerth, and they took up residence in the Upper Cathedral Ward. They're kind of one of the main cornerstones of everything that's happened in Yharnam, which is why I want to focus on them first, and then others kind of fill into this storyline. So the Choir wanted to commune with the Great Ones and ascend humanity, which is essentially the goal of all the other factions in some way, or not all the other factions, but at least some of the core factions. They were using the orphanage, which was inside essentially the Grand Cathedral, where they would essentially take unwanted and orphaned children that they could use in their experiments, for communion, essentially. And they eventually created a kin Great One known as the Celestial Emissary for communion with the true Great Ones, or at least that's the way it sounded. Then there's the Holy Medium. So the Holy Medium was originally discovered in Byrgenwerth and was moved to Upper Cathedral Ward by the Choir, and it somehow granted them audience with Ebrietas, daughter of the Cosmos, and commonly referred to Left Behind Kin, Great One, that was found caring for the phantasms in the labyrinths. I don't know what that Holy Medium was, but I suspect it was the apple-shaped chalice that we used to access the Great Ease Chalice, or Great Ease Labyrinth, or Ease Graveyard as it's sometimes referred to. And if you recall, the phantasms that Ebrietas was kind of overlooking are these vertebrate, slug-like creatures or invertebrate slug-like creatures that harbor arcane powers and is kind of a cornerstone of what abilities we have seen in the choir members. So they always use these arcane artifacts, which we're going to play with more in New Game Plus. And the creatures could also be found in the fishing hamlet all over. A lot of people probably commonly mistake them as for fish, because I know I sure did, but they're actually the slug creatures. The phantasms, I assume, are the same thing. So Ebrietas would only commune with the choir as the highest members of the Healing Church, and allowed them essentially to use her old blood that eventually led to the Ashen Blood and the Beast Scourge, which kind of brings in another faction, so to speak. And if you kind of look very specifically at Upper Cathedral Ward, the use of the old blood and the kin there are kind of some of the defining features. You don't see as many beasts in Upper Cathedral Ward. What you see a lot of are kin. The celestial minions, celestial larvae, brain suckers. I think these are what the people have turned into by communing with her. It's kind of my thoughts on that. They bleed this, like I said, that kind of yellowish fluid. They don't bleed blood anymore. I think that's what's become of some of those people. That, or maybe there's some kind of product of their experiments. I don't know. They're not as, I'd say, grand as Ebrietas. They're a little bit different. So I'd say maybe more on the lines of experimentation. But those are the creatures that we typically found in Upper Cathedral Ward, as opposed to what we saw in Bergenworth, which showed a very different type of communion, or product of communion. So, Ashen Blood and Beast Scourge, that brings in another faction, the Healing Church Hunters. So the Hunters were one of the other main factions. Now, Ashen Blood is kind of what started this. So through the use of blood administration, it eventually led to this bloodborne infection referred to as Ashen Blood that would turn people into poisonous beasts. And it was a group of heretical hunters, as they're commonly referred to, known as the Powder Kegs, that launched an assault on Old Yarnum, where the outbreak initially started. However, Old Yarnum was essentially overrun, and they eventually sealed off the area and let it burn to the ground. Or, not burn to the ground, but they left it in flames, essentially. Now, many believe that the Healing Church was responsible for Old Yarnum, like more specifically responsible, like they were doing this on purpose. And eventually this came to light in the populace, that this had happened, of course, because you can't cover up an entire part of the city burning. And so the Healing Church workshop was then set up to replace the old Hunter workshop, which was led by Gehrman. And essentially this was kind of their move to stop this from happening. Stop the beast, essentially. Because what comes next? The Beast Scourge. So the Beast Scourge hits Yarnum, central Yarnum, and kind of the surrounding areas after the Ashen Blood. And many think it's kind of a takeoff of the Ashen Blood. So what do? They have Ludwig, the first church hunter, start recruiting locals, Yarnumites, to accompany him and the hunters during these hunts. So every night they would go out and hunt these beasts. And Ludwig and his followers would essentially cross the Great Bridge, as they say, and seal the gate until the hunt was over. And then they'd return the next morning. Now, the Healing Church hunters were divided into two essential factions because they weren't all just hunters. There were the white-garbed hunters that would use the blood healing for applied research. They weren't doing this to really help people. They were doing it more for research purposes. And then their subordinates, the black-garbed hunters, would take to the streets and basically cut down the beasts or anybody that they thought might turn into a beast. And so you can imagine that people were afraid of them. Now, hindsight, Ludwig was known for, like I said, recruiting the Yarnumites, and probably worked towards their benefit of not having, probably helped alleviate some of the concerns of the populace by working together. Now, Lawrence eventually came to regret his decision for using the old blood, because he was the one responsible for this. He founded the Healing Church. So he started to regret his decision of using the old blood of Ebrietas. And essentially, it sounds like from the lore, back in the Moon Presence, but eventually he succumbed to the Beast Scourge and was taken down on one of the nights of the hunt. And so he was lost. It was too late for him. Now, somewhere in there comes the other faction, the School of Mensis. So similar to the choir, the Mensis scholars wanted to commune with the Great Ones, and the hunters for their school were essentially known on the streets as kidnappers that would claim to be hunters. And we've read this in some of the item descriptions. They were doing different types of experiments. We don't necessarily know the entirety of this in order to commune, which resulted in, I don't want to necessarily they were all failures, but one of them, the one reborn, was kind of didn't seem like quite something you'd want to produce, if you ask me. And if you look around Yahar'gul Unseen Village, which was their home, that was their home base, they essentially, all the creatures that we fought were essentially, there was more beast-like ones, but they weren't just beasts, they were like body parts. They weren't quite like a normal beast. And we could find those all over the Unseen Village, and we also found them in the Nightmare of Mensis. Now, Mikolash was the founder of the School of Mensis, and he was able to commune with the Great One, with the infant Great One, Murgo, somehow by using a third umbilical cord. So he was probably one of the first ones to do this, I'd say maybe alongside Gehrman. At what time these happened, I'm not quite sure. However, as the item description of the umbilical cord stated, this resulted in the stillbirth of their brains, or as I would just say, it basically killed them. And so the Mensis scholars were essentially killed by this. And Mikolash, we found him in the Nightmare of Mensis, and he had kind of gone insane. In the waking world, his body wasn't alive anymore. It was referred to as mummified. And he was basically the only one that was left. Everybody else had kind of wasted away. Meanwhile, there's this King Great One known as Rom, who is holding a veil over Yharnam to keep the truth of the Mensis ritual hidden from the citizens. Personally, I do not think the School of Mensis cares one way or the other what happens to Yharnam, where Rom is legitimately trying to protect the Yharnamites from losing their minds. That's my personal take on it. Rom could be working with them. As far as I know, I'm unsure about that. But Rom never was aggressive towards us. You have to attack Rom to get her to come at you, essentially. And she's still not very aggressive, even at that point. All we know about Rom is that she was granted eyes by Kaz, as Mikolash had implied, and she was then kind of holding Yharnam together by protecting them from this Mensis ritual. Or using this Mensis ritual, kind of protecting them from the Nightmare of Mensis, because when the veil is lifted, that's when things start to go wrong. So that's kind of the history of this. Now, cut to present day, where does that put us? So our player is known as a hunter from a foreign land that came to Yharnam with the goal of seek pale blood and transcend the hunt, or to complete the hunt, as the original translation goes. So what did we do when we got here? If you cut out all the fighting and beast hunting and even killing of just whatever random stuff we did, we made our way to Bergenworth. That's where we came across Rom. So we went to Bergenworth, we killed Rom at Moonside Lake, and what did we get from that? Ritual secret broken, seek the Nightmare Newborn. What did we do after that? Well, we were transported to Yahar'gul Unseen Village and made our way to Mikolash's corpse, where we were taken into the Nightmare of Mensis. And that's where we fought Murgo's wet nurse and released Murgo from the nightmare. After which we were returned to the Hunter's Dream, where we were given the offer by Gehrman to submit our life and awaken severed from the nightmare with no memory of this. Kind of end game, so to speak. So conclusions on my end, I think it's clear that the Moon Presence wanted us to seek Pale Blood and slay the Nightmare Newborn. I think it's clear that that's coming from the Moon Presence in some way. But to what end is kind of my question. Now, I go back and forth on what this all means. I don't see how people can't. Could it be that we had two objectives where Seek Pale Blood was directing us specifically to Rom? Because Rom was a kin Great One that did not bleed red. Rom bled this kind of yellowish, clear fluid. That was just a thought that I kind of came up with when I was thinking about this. And then Seek the Nightmare Newborn then directed us towards Murgo specifically, or the Nightmare of Mensis more specifically. Or was Pale Blood more referring to the Moon Presence itself? Or maybe not the moon presence, maybe the moon itself. Or was pale blood something else entirely? We don't really know. That's the problem. I think it was left ambiguous on purpose to get us thinking, and I think I'm okay with that. I think that's very interesting. So those are just some of my thoughts on it. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Drop them in the comments later. I'd love to hear what people think about this. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer in many cases. A lot of the stuff is not down in the lore, and I'm pretty sure that Miyazaki has been kind of fluid on the idea of what pale blood means. So those are just some of my thoughts on that. All right, that's a good place to close things out. To recap, we met with Gehrman at the Great Tree for a final confrontation. However, we consumed the 3/3 umbilical cords prior to this based on notes left behind by Lawrence, and knowing that we would be approached and imprisoned by the moon presence otherwise. The moon presence retracted from us, assumably because the umbilical cord allowed us to overpower it somehow, and then we fought it and defeated it, slaying the final nightmare, the hunter's dream. Now, by consuming the 3/3 cords and slaying the nightmare, we became an infant great one ourselves. This would change the future for humans as a whole because the trophy description stated lifting humanity into its next childhood. So we've changed things forever for everybody, in a way. My interpretation of this is that we are likely the only human to have truly ascended in this way. Master Willem, Lawrence, Gehrman, Mikolash, and anybody else that has attempted communion, some have done so more successfully than others. From what we could see, they were only able to get so far, depending on their situations. And they all remained relatively human, other than Lawrence, who succumbed to the beast scourge. So I suppose I would look at this as a good ending, assuming that the moon presence was truly malevolent, which is a fair assumption given what we know. I gotta say this though. However, I can't say that I'm fully convinced. I think it's clear that the Great Ones have their own motives. So consider for a minute that they, like us, can make selfish and righteous decisions, and that we might not have the full picture. I present an alternative, that the moon presence could have been using us to release Murgo and stop the school of Mensis. Mikolash and the Mensis scholars are thought by many to be the true villains in this story, and I don't disagree with that. They don't seem to care about anything but themselves. They seem to be a very selfish group, and we saw what happened with Mikolash. That's all he cared about, was being a part of the Nightmare of Mensis. Now, my counter to that would be that the continuation of the cycle thing. So though I'm not entirely sure what that entails, which is why it's not entirely a full counter to my initial thoughts. Does the hunt continue because people continue blood ministration? Are there new nightmare realms with new great ones, or does the cycle literally continue with the Nightmare of Mensis and Murgo? Just some food for thought. Now that we have completed the story, there are still a few loose ends that I want to address before moving on to New Game Plus. There are 2 weapon-based trophies that we have yet to complete towards the Platinum Trophy, and I would like to play around with the sets and weapons we have so that we can essentially liquidate what we don't need out of our assets again, because we've done this already to an extent, before we move on into New Game Plus. Therefore, that is what we will do next time. With that being said, let us close things out. I will be continuing tonight, so if you are here live, stick around. Otherwise, thank you all for joining, and I will see you all later. Yeah, you tell them, Dago.